VIPER just got a thick buff in 1.04, and now she is incredibly powerful in the right hands. In this video, we're going to be breaking down her general playstyle on attack and defense and tell you specific targeted mistakes and tips that you can start using in your games to guaranteed get value on this insanely powerful hero if you learn to master her. Now, I got a new sub challenge for you. I need you to smash that subscribe button only using your nose. If you could do it, I will be insanely impressed. So definitely let me know in the comments down below if you managed to pull it off, but I frankly don't think you can. Now, without further ado, let's just jump right into it, shall we? So VIPER is one of the only characters that can match the LOS blocking abilities of some of the most powerful characters in the game, Brimstone and Omen. And her crafty one-way orbs can set up completely unfair advantages against the enemy. VIPER can also control entire sections of the map because unlike both Brimstone and Omen, she has reusable LOS blocking abilities, meaning that she can block off sightlines throughout an entire round and can make it exceptionally more difficult to push in, or can help her push in on a point, all the while baiting precious utility. Now first, let's talk about how to play her on attack, and then we're gonna go over defense. So on attack, she wants to use her smokes to create entry. Pretty obvious stuff, right? But specifically, there are tons of rollouts that can be incredibly powerful with her toxic screen because they give a clear route to the site. Just like on A split, there is actually multiple rollouts on both attack A and attack B that can really block off LOS from heaven. Incredibly powerful stuff, and that's one of the many reasons why split is actually VIPER's most powerful map. But with the new toxic screen change, she can honestly be used on any of the maps and she can get tons of value. Now the big question I have for you is, what normally happens when you use a whole bunch of smokes on a point, block off the heaven or the power angle sightlines? That's right, the enemies will often respond with utility like slow or molly or anything like that. Now the beauty of toxic screen is it actually costs you nothing but time in order to actually trade for enemies utility. Because if you make a really insanely powerful LOS blocking toxic screen, right? Enemies don't know if you're pushing or not because they don't have information, so they can respond with utility. But if you keep baiting out utility, baiting out utility, baiting out utility, well, eventually all you have to do is wait for your toxic screen to come back up and you can use the exact same wall to push onto sites and you don't have to play around the utility that you baited out. This is a really underrated aspect of VIPER, but it requires a lot of discipline on your part to not only set up a really powerful wall that blocks off as many angles as possible, but make sure that you play in default for long enough to bait out utility, only to build up a full toxic screen and use it to finally engage on site. Now there is some downsides to this though. Because of toxic screen's inability to be relocated, after you engage with the toxic screen onto a site, many enemies will often hard rotate to it because they know that you can no longer move it no matter what. So if you are the solo smoke on your team, that is definitely one of the weaknesses about VIPER that you need to think about. Now honestly, the best way to offset that weakness is actually have a number of allies pushing for mid control that have to be respected. Because of how long you're going to be spending in default anyways, just baiting out abilities, you can send multiple members of your team to actually go make a proactive play or vie for space. They can either aggressively flank, fight for heavy control, or just catch people in rotation. There's a lot of different options, but having 2 or even 3 people trying to make a proactive play on a different side of the map while you're just simply there baiting utility can make it so the enemy cannot full rotate to that site, and then eventually your teammates can meet up with you as you push onto site after you baited out a substantial amount of utility. Now another way to play her on attack is to use her as an actual just bait. VIPER can be one of the best baiters in the game for this exact reason. Like I talked about, enemies often want to hard rotate because they realize that she cannot move her toxic screen. Now honestly, one of the most powerful underrated strategies is just playing VIPER with another dedicated smoke hero. Someone like Omen and Brimstone, for example, because here's the thing, you can use VIPER to bait out tons and tons and tons of utility because enemies have to respect your toxic screen in default for a long period of time. But then afterwards, you can have an Omen or Brimstone that has more or less sandbagged all of their smokes to better help you push onto site after you baited out all that utility. On top of that, there's so many different possibilities, a toxic screen, a toxic orb, and other smokes where you can really just block off entire LOS from the enemy. You combine that with double info, it leads to a very powerful aggressive team comp. Now let's move on to the defensive style on VIPER, because this one, a lot of people don't really know how to play VIPER on defense. They don't know where to set up their toxic screens or anything like that. Well, honestly, VIPER is the best, one of the best mid contesters. If you're playing defense, you should be trying to fight for a mid control because you're so good at it with repeatable LOS blocking, AoE ability, and your ultimate that just claims space. VIPER is very good at contesting mid. Speaking of those one-ways, there are a number of them that you absolutely need to learn that you can set up for yourself or for a nearby ally. You can easily put a one-way smoke on top of the bind mid-A boxes where your heaven player can see their feet. You yourself can throw a smoke on top of the door frame in the middle of split B mid. There are so many different ones that you definitely need to learn, and being able to constantly throw up your smoke at any time throughout the game, and then on top of that, if enemies have routed and planted at any of the other sites, you can take it with you to use aggressively later on, is so important and really honestly powerful because it can be used to control the space first off, and then later on you can use it to take back space that you lost. Also, unlike cyber cage one-ways, enemies can't just bait it out and then back off, and like we said, technically the one-way smoke could last forever through the round. Now, the biggest problem though is a lot of Vipers will not utilize her toxic AoE in between her smoke uptime, because when the smoke goes down, there is a wait time or delay before she can bring it back up, and enemies will use that as a go-ahead to push in. But if you can stagger the smoke going down with some of her AoE blocking, you can basically set up scenarios where enemies can never take the mid site. You know, you smoke it off, then you replace it with your AoE, then back to smoke, then back to AoE. You can stall them for such an enormously long time, which is why she's so good at contesting mid on many, many maps. Now, another thing we need to talk about playstyle before we get into the big tips and mistakes with VIPER is general playstyles with VIPER. And honestly, you should be mixing it up between being aggressive and defensive on VIPER. One round you could be playing aggressively and push through your smokes, route around into a lurk position, and set up an engage on the enemy. The next round you play incredibly passive and just use your one-way smokes to your advantage. You can constantly mix it up with VIPER, and she can really play this lurk playstyle that really lets her get in close and flank the enemy. So constantly mixing it up makes it really hard for enemies to know what you're going to do next, and can allow you to get free value just with that. Now moving on to the top 5 biggest mistakes and tips with VIPER. The first one is poor management of your fuel resource. Now, it's a lot easier when you can use both your wall and your orb at the same time and it doesn't take any more fuel, which is an insanely awesome buff. But at the same time, you really need to make sure that your wall doesn't go down when you don't want it to. And it's really important to make sure that you're sandbagging or building up your walls and your orbs and whatever, that meter, while you're not currently being engaged upon. It really is important to build up that timing, because if you ever get it wrong and you can't have a wall when you need it, then you're not going to be able to do your job as VIPER, and you're probably going to die as a result. Not to mention, if you're ever in an area where you need that wall to protect you and it goes down on you, then you're just going to get killed outright. Now, the second big mistake is actually not relaying to your team when you plan on rising a wall or dropping a wall. Remember, your wall and your orb not only does damage to your allies, but can block off their LOS, and when your walls fall, your allies could be hiding behind it and just get instantly killed. So you really need to be relaying, my orb is about to drop, my wall is about to drop, or I'm about to raise my wall in a couple of seconds, or raising my wall in 3 seconds, or something like that. Those are calls that you should always be making on VIPER, because your smokes and your LOS blocking abilities affect your teammates, and it can hurt them or help them if they know that information prior to. Now, the third thing is a tip about her ultimate, and with that new 15-second ultimate, where she can last 15 seconds outside of her ultimate and it still stays there, VIPER can easily defensive smoke in a mid position and rotate completely off or lurk off and lurk back with relative ease. A common powerful strat that you should incorporate is almost always ult when you see the enemy spike down and you're at a numbers parity or anything like that, because enemies do not want to push into your VIPER pit. Pretty obvious, but that is one of the most powerful and effective ways to use the VIPER pit to completely lock down a downed spike. Now, as an additional strat with VIPER, you can actually use her orb plus her VIPER's pit to push onto sites and make a plant play. And because of this, plus her wall and all her other abilities, VIPER is actually an insanely good aggressive planter. So that's definitely something you should keep in mind as the spike holder. You can make these really sneaky plays where you sneak under the enemy's noses and plant without them even realizing you're making that play. Now, the fourth big concept we have to talk about Viper is that Viper's abilities are really cheap, and after you buy all your abilities on the first round, you're still gonna have 400 credits left, and the question is, what do you buy with that? Well, there's different things you could buy. Well, you could just rock the regular pistol and armor. That's always fine to do because you're just gonna have a little bit more power, and that is really good for lurking and things like that in your orbs, especially aggressively on that first round. You can really catch people off guard by closing in the distance, and you're gonna be able to take that one headshot by a ghost player, which can be extremely important. On top of that, because of the same nature of lurking and holding close sightlines, both a shorty and a frenzy are viable options. These weapons let you trade close range kills, but keep in mind that on really open sightlines, they're going to be far less powerful. So really, you got to adjust the weapons that you pick based on the ranges that you plan on holding. Now, the fifth and final takeaway on Viper, you can have powerful setups on a point where she trades for a kill and then instantly walls an enemy that's swinging. Because of the way that Viper lurks around her own smoke and can use her own smoke to protect her disengage, wallbang enemies, or anything along those lines, Viper almost never wants to rock the Vandal because it will give away her position through her smoke. Basically, almost 100% of the time, if you're playing Viper and you're picking an AR, it should be the Phantom, not the Vandal. It just plays better into your kit. It makes more logistical sense around your abilities, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot better time, have more impact on average if you're using the Phantom instead. Anyways, if you have any questions about Viper, or if you want to see an in-depth VOD analysis of some high-level pro player or streamer playing Viper, I can definitely do that, but I need to know if there's a certain amount of support, so definitely smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments down below. But that's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time.